Thousands of nonviolent federal prisoners eligible for early release under a promising Trump-era law remain locked up nearly 4 years later because of inadequate implementation, confusion, and bureaucratic delays, prisoner advocacy groups, affected inmates, and former federal prison officials say. Even the Biden administration's attempt to provide clarity to the First Step Act by identifying qualified inmates and then transferring them to home confinement or another form of supervised release appears to be falling short, according to prisoner advocates familiar with the law. The Department of Justice was tasked with carrying out the law through the Federal Bureau of Prisons, but the Bureau Director, Michael Carvajal, a Trump administration holdover, announced his retirement in January amid criticism of a crisis-filled tenure marked by agency scandals. No replacement for Carvajal has been named, and criminal justice advocates contend that for the Bureau to allow even one person to be incarcerated beyond what is permitted under the First Step Act exposes ongoing failures. "It shouldn't be this complicated and it shouldn't take this long," said Kevin Ring, president of the nonprofit advocacy group Families Against Mandatory Minimums, or FAMM. "Here we are, 4 years later, and it's maddening." The Justice Department published a final rule in January that implements an integral feature of the law in which inmates can earn so-called time credits, which are obtained through participation in prison and work programs and calculated as part. The problem, advocates say, they are identifying inmates whose time credits aren't getting applied, and in some cases, the inmates aren't getting released as early as they should be. Tim Baumel/Missouri House of Representatives via AP Curtis, 41, who is being held in the Federal Correctional Institution Elkton in Ohio, said he hasn't had his time credits added since January, and if they were, he believes he would have been released in early June. As one of the many inmates that benefit from the FSA, he wrote, referring to the First Step Act, "I've made strides to take classes, work, and stay productive. But the BOP and its systemic way of operating inefficiently have stymied my ability to take the most amount of classes in an orderly fashion. I can only wonder if this is by design, and what the total extent of impacted inmates is." The Justice Department declined to comment on Curtis' case, citing privacy reasons. Data provided by the Bureau of Prisons shows that as of June 18, more than 8,600 inmates have had their sentences recalculated and are slated for release with the application of their time credits. But it's unclear how many qualified inmates are entitled to have been released early but remain incarcerated. In a response, Bureau officials said, "We have no data which suggests inmates had their release dates delayed." But with the Bureau's own data identifying about 66,600 inmates who are eligible to earn time credits, some industry experts disagree. "We estimate that there are thousands of inmates who will not receive the full benefit, days off of their federal prison sentence, of the First Step Act simply because the agency is uncertain how to calculate these benefits," said Walter Pavlo, president of the consulting firm Prisonology LLC, Warehouse. In particular, the law's supporters believe it can cut particularly harsh sentences for nonviolent drug offenders and lessen the racial disparities affecting people of color in the criminal justice system. President Donald Trump, with Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican Iowa, by his side, signs the First Step Act on December 21, 2018. An inmate's eligibility is measured by an algorithm known as the Prisoner Assessment Tool targeting estimated risks and needs, or patterns, scoring them in different categories, including their history of violence and whether they've been involved in serious incidents while incarcerated, to determine. In order to collect time credits for early release under the First Step Act, inmates must be at a minimum or low risk of reoffending and not have been convicted of certain serious crimes. Once the credits are calculated and it is determined those credits equal the time left on the sentence, the inmate can be transferred out of prison into pre-release custody, such as a halfway house or home confinement. Some may also be eligible for supervised release, like probation. The situation has worsened because of staffing shortages amid the COVID pandemic. In addition, some inmates say, even if they've taken the appropriate classes, their time credits aren't being regularly calculated, potentially delaying their ability to get released sooner. The Justice Department's final rule also allows for time credits to be counted retroactively for any prison and work programs inmates participated in after the First Step Act became law in 2018. The biggest problem is nobody on the front lines seems to understand the new rule, Pablo said. There needs to be a task force on this now. Revising the algorithm, the Justice Department said it is continuing to evaluate its use of the pattern algorithm after concerns by advocates that some risk categories that the tool examines are believed to exacerbate racial disparities. The agency's statistics published in November found that about 55% of white inmates were classified as minimum or low risk for recidivism, compared with about 28% of black inmates. In its 2022 annual report examining the effectiveness of the First Step Act, the Justice Department said it was implementing another updated version of Pattern in an effort to mitigate against various racial and ethnic disparities associated with prior risk level categories. But Jim Fellman, of Flow. The federal government has shown the world how we lead in imprisonment, but we can also show the world how to lead in getting people out, he said. She said she was released early from prison in Danbury, Connecticut, to home confinement in 2020 because she has underlying medical conditions that put her at higher risk for COVID. She believes that would have happened in June 2021 based on her time credits if the program had been running as intended. Now Brooks is advocating on behalf of other inmates at Danbury and across the country to ensure they understand their rights under the law. It's still vague how they're calculating time, she said. Nobody can give you a manual for here are the classes that qualify, the credit you'll get and here's how they're applied. That doesn't exist. So how do I even know if my time was calculated correctly? Alice Phillips. She said she was given no guidance by the prison, other than being told in December 2019 that she was a minimum risk offender eligible under the First Step Act. Phillips, 56, who received a 2-year sentence in 2019 after she was convicted of wire fraud related to a real estate scheme, was also released to home confinement in 2020 because of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief and Economic Security Act. She said she continued to work during home confinement in prison-approved jobs, but those time credits were never counted as they would be now, leaving her probationary period to last until 2024, instead of 2023. I behaved. I did the work. I qualified for these credits, she said. I'm not free, but I could be free sooner. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more breaking news.